The morning light was still weak, and shadows clung to the trees. I drove back into town, my nerves still shaken by what had happened at my sister's house. The leering eyes of the jack-o'-lanterns haunted me, their grinning faces lingering in my mind. The familiar streets twisted under the dim light of morning, shadows stretching unnaturally, as if the night's horrors still lurked in every corner. I pulled into the gas station, the neon open sign pulsing like a tired heartbeat against my windshield. Inside, old yellowed lights cast everything in a sickly sepia tone, as if I'd stepped into a faded photograph. The aisle stretched before me, shelves stocked with rows of products that blurred together in my peripheral vision. A display of beef jerky toppled slightly to one side, its contents picked over like carrion. The security mirror in the corner showed warped reflections that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Near the register, someone had left a small pumpkin, its surface carved with an intricate symbol I didn't recognize. It seemed out of place among the cigarette displays and lottery tickets, and something about its placement felt deliberate. I tried to ignore how its carved eyes seemed to follow me as I walked past. I headed straight for the cooler, my footsteps falling silent on the worn linoleum floor, too silent, as if the space itself was swallowing the sound. The refrigerator's door stuck slightly as I pulled it, the rubber seal peeling away, with a sound like tearing skin. My hand trembled as I reached for the can, and through the foggy glass door, I could have sworn I saw something move behind me, but the reflection showed only empty aisles when I spun around. The clerk, an old acquaintance, stood behind the counter, his familiar face oddly altered by the strange morning light filtering through the dusty windows. A radio played old country music so faint it might have been bleeding through from another dimension, the singer's voice warped and distant. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his eyes darting to the window, where the glass reflected only darkness, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. I chuckled, but my voice came out shaky, hanging in the stale air. Something metallic clinked in the back room. Probably the old radiator settling, but the sound made me jump. "Have you seen Sophie?" I asked, my voice wavering. The analog clock on the wall ticked arrhythmically, each second lasting a different length than the last. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. The counter between us was stained with rings from countless coffee cups, forming patterns that almost looked like symbols. "You know your sister always leaves breadcrumbs, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Just keep your eyes open," he replied. "Sometimes the clues are right in front of you." As he spoke, a truck passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the store like a searchlight. A strange mix of dread and curiosity washed over me as I paid for the drink and headed back to my car. Behind me, the door's bell chimed discordantly, and for a moment, I could have sworn I heard someone whisper my name. My gaze fell upon Sophie's sweater, lying on the passenger seat. The clerk's words replayed in my mind, and then it hit me. It hadn't been left haphazardly. The last place she wore that sweater had been the library. I sped there. The brick building loomed before me, its windows dark and uninviting. The parking lot was empty. The silence felt deliberate. I tried the front door, locked. But as I turned to leave, A flicker of movement caught my eye. Through the glass, deep in the shadows of the reference section, a familiar shape moved between the shelves. My heart leaped. Sophie? A soft tapping drew my attention to the side of the building. There, barely visible in the early morning light, was another pumpkin. Its carved face wasn't menacing. Instead, it bore the same symbols I'd seen at the rest stop. Below it, painted onto the concrete, "Employee Entrance." The door opened with a touch. The library's interior was a maze of shadows and whispers, the shelves creating long corridors. In the rare book section, I found someone's research spread across a table. Newspaper clippings about 5 families, hand-drawn symbols, and a map of the town with 5 points carefully marked. But what made my blood run cold was the photograph lying in the center. It showed our grandmother, young and serious, standing with 4 other people. They were all holding carved pumpkins, each bearing one of the symbols from the note lying beside it. On the back, in our grandmother's handwriting, the binding failed. "We weren't ready. I'm so sorry we left this to you." A sound behind me, books sliding against each other, a shelf creaking. I spun around. There, at the end of the aisle, stood Sophie. But something was wrong. Her movements were too rigid, her smile too wide. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice carrying an echo that shouldn't have been possible. "But you still don't understand what's really happening, do you?" As she stepped forward, I saw what I'd missed before. Her shadow wasn't her own. It writhed and twisted on the wall behind her, taking the shape of something ancient and hungry. In her hands, she held a pumpkin, its unfinished symbol pulsing with an orange light that made my eyes hurt. The library doors slammed shut. I had found my sister just as I'd wanted, but as her shadow continued to grow, stretching across the ceiling and down the walls, I backed away. I turned and ran, ducking between shelves, trying to lose it in the maze of books. The thing that wasn't Sophie called out with her voice, the sound echoing from multiple directions. "Don't you want to make things right?" A hand shot out of the darkness, clamping over my mouth. I tried to scream, but another arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me backward through what I thought had been a solid wall. I struggled until I heard a familiar whisper. "Stop fighting, you idiot. It's me." Sophie, the real Sophie. Her hand trembled against my mouth, her breath quick and scared against my ear. We stood frozen in the hidden space as the thing wearing her face stalked past, its movements becoming less human with each step. She pressed against a seam in the wall I hadn't noticed before. A draft of cold air brushed against my neck, carrying the scent of old paper and something earthier, like grandmother's root cellar. The shadows were thick here. Sophie reached up and pulled a chain. A single brass reading lamp sputtered to life, its weak light barely penetrating the gloom. "We don't have much time," she whispered, guiding me to a desk wedged against the far side of the wall. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling with titles that made my throat go dry. Ancient rites of binding, the 5 seals, symbols of power through the ages. Sophie pulled an old leather-bound journal from her bag. Grandmother and the other families managed to bind it back in 47, but the spell was flawed. It was always meant to be temporary. She flipped through brittle pages. The binding needed 5 perfect carvings, but they didn't know the 5th one required twins. Without that perfect balance, it was like putting a Band-Aid on a broken dam. She glanced up, her face pale. Then last month, when they broke ground for that new development on Miller's Hill, they disturbed the original binding site. That's when the pumpkins started appearing. The binding is unraveling, and those things out there, they're just the beginning. We have to complete the ritual before midnight. A sound like nails scraping against wood made us freeze. The thing wearing Sophie's face was getting closer. Through the crack in the wall, I watched as all the pumpkins slowly turned their carved faces toward our hiding spot. Their grins grew wider, impossibly wider, their eyes glowing with inner fire. "Found you," the thing with Sophie's face whispered, its voice everywhere and nowhere. Sophie grabbed my hand. "Whatever happens, don't let go." As the possessed pumpkins pressed closer, their combined supernatural weight seemed to distort the very space around us, like reality itself was buckling under their presence. Then, with a sound like 1,000 books being torn at once, the floor gave way. Sophie yanked me sideways as fragments of plaster exploded around us. We tumbled through darkness, her hand still gripping mine. We hit solid ground hard. Above us, through the settling debris, the thing that wore my sister's face peered down. Its features had begun to slip like wax melting in the heat, revealing something underneath that made my mind recoil. "Move," Sophie hissed, pulling me to my feet. We were in an old storm drain. Curved concrete walls stretched into darkness, slick with decades of seepage. Our footsteps echoed off the rounded ceiling, mixing with the constant drip of unseen leaks. The sound of running water grew louder, suggesting larger drainage channels ahead. Behind us, something scraped against concrete, a dry, chittering noise like centipede legs magnified 1,000 times. The sound skittered up and down the curved walls until it seemed to come from everywhere. "It's not just following us," Sophie panted. "It's hurting us." Every side passage we passed was blocked by tiny pumpkins, their carved faces glowing with sickly orange light, the water around them steaming. Sophie made sharp turns at specific junctions, following some pattern in the chaos. "There's a way out through the old storm drain system, but we have to—" She stopped short, throwing an arm across my chest. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber. Morning light filtered down through a grating far above, and there stood our grandma, exactly as she looked 15 years ago. Her smile stretched across her face like a crescent moon. Her eyes burned like molten amber. "Hello, my darlings," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Why are you running? Don't you want to finish what we started?" Sophie pulled out an ancient-looking knife, its blade etched with the same symbols from the pumpkins. The metal seemed to drink in the morning light, streaming through the grating, then pulse with an inner radiance of its own. The symbols blazed to life, filling the chamber with a brilliant, searing light. Our grandmother's figure distorted, shrieking in a voice that dropped to impossible depth, a sound of pure malevolence. The pumpkins surrounding us began to retreat, their lights flickering and dimming as if being drained by the knife's power. "Run!" Sophie pulled me toward a narrow passage. We burst through a rusted grate into the morning sun behind the library and sprinted to my car. As I gunned the engine, Sophie finally spoke, her voice shaking. That wasn't really her. None of them are what they seem. We need to get to these coordinates, she said, punching them into her phone. That's where it has to happen. That's where it all started. I glanced at the GPS, 3 hours to our destination. In the rearview mirror, I could see the pumpkins retreating into the shadows, their faces twisted in fury. The knife had hurt them somehow, bought us time, but I knew they'd be back. The knife, I said, pulling onto the highway. How did you know? Sophie opened the journal, her hand still trembling. Grandmother left us everything we need to know, but we have to get there by midnight, and... She paused, her face grim. We're not the only ones trying to get there. Behind us, storm clouds began to gather, unnaturally dark for morning. We had a 3-hour drive ahead of us, plenty of time to make it before midnight, but something told me this journey wasn't going to be simple. The real question was, what else was racing toward those coordinates, and what would be waiting for us when we arrived?